Vice Chairman of the Synagogue and President Council Member, and I've been asked to chair the evening. We are here to hear our two speakers on the subject of can one be a progressive Jew in Israel? And we have, first of all on my left, Joan Garson. Joan is the current chair of Arzenu, the umbrella organisation of Reform and Progressive Religious Zionists, about which she's going to tell us a little bit more. That was founded in 1980. She sits on the board of the New Israel Fund in Canada. She has various responsibilities in the reform world and in her synagogue for many years. She's a practicing lawyer, but apparently currently disengaging from private practice to work in the financial management company of her husband and to expand her time for volunteer activities. She and her husband live in Toronto. They're members of the delightfully named Holy Blossom Temple, which is one of the 5th or 6th largest in North America. Yeah. She has 2 children, a son working in New York and a daughter in the IDF. Yaron Shavit, on my right, is the chairperson of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, the umbrella movement for reform and liberal synagogues in Israel. A partner in a law firm, has an MA in legal studies, lives near Jerusalem, recently retired from his position as the Division Chief of Staff of the Elite Division in the IDF, is that correct? Yes. And is still active as a colonel on reserve duty. He's a member of the Mabaseret. Been a board member of that congregation for more than a decade and served as chair for 5 years. He's the Arzenu representative to the World Zionist Organization, is married and has 3 children. So, as I say, the subject, can one be a progressive Jew in Israel? Joan is going to start us off with something a little bit more about Arzenu, and then I think there'll be a sort of conversational discussion between the two. So, Joan, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I want to repeat the thanks to all of you for coming out. Even in Canada, this would be a cold night, and it's delightful to share it with you all here. I know that people's eyes kind of glaze over when they hear the word Arzenu. They don't know what it's about, and more importantly, they don't know why it should matter to them. It in fact feeds directly into the question of can one be a progressive Jew in Israel. I'm going to start with the Arzenu story and then pass it over to Yaron. Arzenu, the Reform Zionist organization of the world, and its local constituent organizations, including Pro-Zion here in the UK, were members of what was, skipping the first 80 years or so of history of the World Zionist Organization, which, as we all know, was founded by Herzl in 1897, up to the present day. It was not an arena which contributed in an important way to reform life in Israel until recently. Why does it matter, and what did it do? The World Zionist Organization, for historical reasons, is the only place where the political world in Israel encounters the organized Zionist world from outside of Israel. In Israel, a third of the representatives of the World Zionist Organization are chosen by how Israeli Zionist political parties do in elections. So if there were a labor sweep, the next World Zionist Congress would be filled with Labour Party members. So it represents the current moment in Israeli politics, and there's therefore also a direct tie between Israeli political parties and the World Zionist Organization. For the diaspora, the outside of Israel Zionist world, seating depends on how Zionist organizations do in elections, which until this year have been held every 4 years. So I'm sure many of you were solicited to vote for Pro-Zion. I hope you all did vote. Pro-Zion actually did very well in 2006, which was the last election, as did, and here comes the nub of it, as did the entire Reform Zionist countries around the world. In fact, after the 2006 Congress elections, Reform was either the largest or the second largest, and I absolutely can't remember, individual movement within the World Zionist Organization. 2010 before the World Zionist Congress, which took place in the immediately past June. We, that is Arzenu and our Israeli allies, represented by Yaron, and he'll tell you more about that, said, just a second, we've got an opportunity to use our power within the World Zionist Organization to make alliances with people who share our pluralistic agenda within the Israeli political milieu, but also to use that relationship to give the reform movement in Israel an avenue into the Israeli political scene. This had begun before, but we'd never seen so clearly that this was a moment when our strength in the World Zionist Organization could be useful to the Israeli political parties represented there. So we negotiated a formal written agreement with, in the end, two political parties, the Labour Party and Meretz. Both of those parties were, of course, looking to their own advantage. They wanted to increase their coalition power within the World Zionist Organization, but it was more than that, because our affiliation agreement includes specific statements that both of those political parties would follow through on our common values, our values of pluralism, social justice, making Israel a country which reflects our values. So this was a moment. We, all of a sudden, had political connections in Israel which were tied to our goals. We then go forward to the Congress. We were the single largest faction in the entire Congress. We worked in a very disciplined way. People who were there, if anybody knows anyone who attended that Congress, it was a very exciting time to be a Reformed Jew. The vote would come up, and our section, which was the biggest section, we would all in an organized way vote the same way because we were very disciplined and we had had thorough discussions in advance of how we felt about each issue that came to be discussed, and we carried the day on each issue. And there was a real hope by the right, who had brought Shas into the World Zionist Organization, that there would be a swing to the right. None of their desired resolutions passed, and perhaps more importantly, they were left disempowered, and we were left with a feeling of real co-op, real power as a group within that institution. Since the time of the Congress, of course, you can see I could talk about the political world there endlessly. I'm going to hold back because that's not our topic tonight. Our topic is, can one be a progressive Jew in Israel? And what happened next is exactly on point. You'll all remember that in the summer we began to experience the dramatic battles over the Rotem bill. Two things happened directly as a result of the reform strength within the Congress. Number one, I'm saving the best till later, or the better till later.
That's the conversion bill.
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you for clarifying. When we came to the conversion bill battle, I'm not sure if it was as dramatically clear here as it was in North America, but Natan Sharansky set himself to, set himself to be the spokesperson for outside of Israel visions about the kind of partnership that should take place between Jews outside of Israel and in Israel. He advocated the position that there should not be a bill passed which was unacceptable in diaspora. Why did Natan Sharansky do that? Of course, because it was the right thing from where we sit, but it's slightly more complicated. When he stood for election to be chair of the Jewish Agency for Israel, he had to meet with the reform representatives of the World Zionist Organization, and I remember vividly sitting beside him at a meeting, and we said, we can't support you. You're an admirable man with a wonderful history, but we can't support you unless you commit to supporting a pluralist agenda in your work. And he said, of course I will. Well, he did. So you recognize that was a change. It was a change. I won't go into that, but he said, of course I will, and he did and has. And one of the best fora for discussing pluralist issues right now is the Jewish Agency Unity of the Jewish People Committee, where there have been some very interesting discussions and where we have been well represented amongst others like Gilad Karif. That was the first outcome directly relevant to the question we discussed tonight. The second relating to the conversion bill, the Rotten bill, is because of the political ties we made before the Congress, we were able to call, we, our representatives in Israel, were able to call ministers of the government and express our view and say, we expect you to convey this into the government discussions, and they did. They did. We had the ear of government and we had spokespeople. And then, kind of the icing on the cake, we have now reached a moment of partnership where ministers of government call us. Where when a bill comes before the government for consideration which reflects on our common agenda, we get the phone call. We, in this case, is Yaron. And I think this is a perfect moment to pass it over to you, Yaron, to continue the story.
Thank you. So first of all, good evening, and I would like to take a time out. I will continue the story.
Yep.
But first, just to, I'm sure we all convey our thoughts to what's happening in Israel and the fire in America. These are probably emails that I'm getting on the way because we have congregations in the middle of that area. Joan has her daughter very close to it. She was afraid that as soldiers they'll be called in to help. You know that the casualties that had died were actually police officers, the cadets that were called in to help, and unfortunately the fire caught them while driving, and they lost control over the bus, turned over, and that's the unfortunate outcome of that. So that's one thing. And another thing is that one of the nice things about being a Reform Jew in Israel is that whenever we meet, we start with a Bar Torah, something about the Torah, some thoughts. So as a Reform liberal Jew, sitting here in the UK, listening to being present at the light candling and singing Maoz Tzur, I'd like us to reflect on the fact that Maoz Tzur is a very unprogressive song. And we sing it wholeheartedly, actually saying, and as Israelis, though it's our mother tongue, we don't think of the words until the first time we started thinking of it. It's actually saying that when we praise you, the Lord, is when we bring to the slaughterhouse our enemies who are barking like dogs. Not a very nice song, not with very nice words, and especially isn't very progressive and very liberal. Nevertheless, it became part of our tradition. So, but let's be aware of that, and we'll make sure that eventually we, progressive Jews, will change the words of this song. Let's take it as a task. So that's a time out about that. First, to the subject of the evening, can one be a progressive Jew in Israel? The answer is very simple. Yes, you have a living example of that. In my case, it's even an example of someone who did not come as a newcomer, as a Lechadash to Israel, being connected to a Reform or progressive congregation abroad, but someone who was born in Israel, a Sabra, who didn't know that he was a Reformed Jew until 13 years ago. And I think the truth is that most of the Jewish Israeli society are Reforms. They just don't know it yet, and it's true. And it has been written by news reporters, one of them Yair Lapid, a very prominent young news reporter who's the son of Tony Lapid, who was a minister, a member of Knesset in Shinui. And he goes to Beit Daniel from time to time, attends there in Tel Aviv. He also he also weds couples on a completely secular weddings. He does. That's an income too. So, anyway, he said that we actually, all of us are Reformed Jews, we just don't know it yet until we come to some kind of contact with Reformed Judaism. And when Reformed Judaism in Israel, unlike, by the way, our basic competitors, which are the conservatives, is very much Israeli, which is important because people don't feel it's something alien to them, but it's very much Israeli. They tend to feel at home when they connect. So the biggest, by far our most important challenges is to have more and more Israelis exposed to reform congregations, to reform activities, to reform institutions, and understand that they were actually, until they were told or found out by themselves, they are Reform Jews, and that's their way of living, and they should come out and say that that's what they are. I think the question that we are actually asking is when, I don't think the can is the issue, can or when will progressive Judaism in Israel be institutionalized? I think that's the question. When will the society or the institutions, the governmental institutions in Israel actually admit to the fact that there are more than one way, more than one stream in Judaism, and the Orthodox way is not the only way to perform Judaism. That is actually the question. And that's how we are connected. It's because we are such a small movement in Israel, it's through the power that such a big reform movement has outside of Israel, within the Jewish world, that we can, if we can use that power, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment, to actually empower our own movement, that's when more and more Israelis at this point, politicians and leaders at different positions, suddenly understand the fact that speaking to reforms is not going to the States or to the UK, London, to speak to Reform Jews, but they actually have to communicate with Reform Jews in Israel, and you know what? They're actually good people. They are Israelis living in Israel, making a living, going to Miluim, actually even some of them within Miluim, from lieutenants became to be colonels, meaning they did a lot of Miluim, a lot of they're committed, and still they think that they should make a statement of the fact that when they decide to go to a synagogue, which isn't 3 times a day, but when they do go to a synagogue, it will not be an Orthodox synagogue that they go to, but it will rather be a Reform synagogue where they can hug their wife and their daughter and sit together and pray together and actually feel that they can connect to many of the words of the prayer that otherwise in the regular Orthodox prayers that we pray in Israel and the Orthodox way they pray Sidur in Israel, many of the things that are said there I can't connect to. I feel that I'm actually not being truthful to myself when I go to a synagogue and have to pray with words that I don't concur to. So we are now at the verge of the point where people are starting to understand that, and I must say, just so that we won't feel again that only one side that's giving and the other side that's getting, it's actually a two-way street. Because by the fact that we are there, it's the first time, for instance, institutionalized, and I have spoken to some of you who know these institutions very well. What happened in the past was that the reforms, not being in Israel, not being present in Israel, they would give their force once every 4 years to some kind of a political arrangement and walk away for 4 years. Their forces would be utilized, actually taking advantage of, by the parties who were present on the ground. They took the forces, said, oh, we love you reforms, thank you so much, hug you, and then turn away and say, forget you for 4 years and we'll talk to you back when the next Congress comes. And that was the truth, that's what the situation was. This time when they try to do it to us, and they are trying, we say, no, we have an agreement, we are going to decide who the chair of the Kakal, the JNF, is going to be. And although the present chair is very happy with the fact that he's having a chair, a very nice salary, very important, it's a strong institution to be in charge of, and he doesn't really want to leave his chair, and he finds it surprising that the reforms are fighting for their right to nominate the chair of the KKL, because it's our right. We are the strongest part within the faction who, under the agreement that we made for the whole organization, are the They're astonished from the fact that we're not caving in. And they're going to courts, and we'll fight them in courts, and I won't be paid the attorney fees, and I'll do that for pro bono, and that's what I've been doing, and Joan knows it because she went to see me at one of these court sessions, which aren't very nice because the union is sitting all the back because they're supporting the present chair, because he promised them very nice, bigger salaries, because it's not from his own pocket, it's from our pocket, from the Jewish pocket, from the Jewish monies that were paid all these years to the KKL, to the Blue Box, and they're supporting him and saying, what is this man saying in the Supreme Court of Israel? No, this is a struggle about the ability of Jews around the world that have the power within the Congress to make sure that a person who is committed to their agenda receives the position. Because we have a saying about what is going to be done with land in Israel. This is first and foremost an ideological, a moral issue. That's not only an issue about money. Land in Israel is a moral issue. That's why we fought hard that the Orthodox, who are very much after this position, knowing that this position of land gives them a lot of leverage regarding settlement, will not receive this position, and we took it for ourselves, creating the biggest faction so that we'll be able to nominate the chair of the Kakal, so that once a person is nominated, he he's responsible to answer to our faction. And we go back to receive orders, and they accept that we take our time. Whenever there's an issue on the table, I tell them, okay, it will take me 24 hours, sometimes 72 hours. I will translate the document to English. I will send it to our leaders abroad. We will have a discussion, and we'll come back to you with an answer. What is our answer about the decision to do that or otherwise? So that's why I'm saying it's a two-way street.
I just want to make one comment here. I want to underline something Yaron said, I think because it's just hitting me over and over again. So there's a different world now when we not only have a moral view about what we think is right and wrong as Reformed Jews, but we have power to influence outcomes. Instead of feeling like the powerless, oppressed, and in many ways we still have many battles to fight, we also now have the responsibility of being able to influence outcomes. And in the case of the Jewish National Fund, the power to initiate. And it's, I think it will take us a while, us as Reform and Progressive Jews around the world, a while to reflect on what this really means. It's a new kind of responsibility. It means that we, acting through our brethren in Israel, need to be aware of exercising that power wisely. It means we can't just sit on the sidelines and say, oh, those guys did such a bad job. Those guys, in some cases, now will be us. So I'll underline that change, which is certainly a huge one for me.
Now, when you take upon yourself responsibility, you take power, you take with it responsibility, and you have to answer. And you make mistakes, like we talked about making mistakes within your own synagogue and within your own council. You make mistakes, and you have to answer for these mistakes. And but that's the rule, you know. It was too many years that the Reform world decided that we'll stay clean, we'll stay out of the political game, and we'll be very happy with the fact that we don't dirty our hands, which is always very good to feel. But unfortunately, what it means is that we're giving away the power that we should exercise in order to strengthen our demands. That's all. And our demands are moral and right, and we should fight for them. That's the idea that we're trying to pass on. Two more examples of what he said. Stopping the Rotten conversion bill was something of a joint military operation. Like every of these things, you have to hit from different fronts. We actually stopped it, not just so that we can understand the process. The process was that this was a legislation act, so Israeli eyes, it seemed a regular bill, and I spoke to Rotem. I know him as an attorney. We tried cases together before he became member of Knesset, and I spoke to him during, after, and everything about the bill. And at least the way he says it, he thought that this was a very good solution for a problem that lies within the Israeli society. We have 300,000 Jews, immigrants from Russia, that came to Israel, are not accepted as Jews by the Orthodox institutions. Therefore, let's pass a bill that will allow city rabbis who are more liberal to accept them, to convert them, to accept them as Jews, and these conversions will be accepted by the institutions of the Orthodox. That's what it says. It was, when we read it through our eyes, through our lawyers, that we said that is a very big danger behind what seems to be a very innocent legislation. It actually says that in order to be accepted, converted Jew in Israel, you have to be accepted by the Orthodox institutions. That is something that we can't allow. But initially, to Israelis, everybody said, what are you fighting for? We have a problem here. Let's solve this problem. And if you are talking about the innuendos are actually, and I went on during the night, during these the days that we were fighting for the bill, to look at the blogs and what people were reacting. People were saying, this is not a problem of the Israeli society. This is a problem with Jews abroad. It's their problem. It's not our problem.
Yeah.
Let's pass on the legislation and solve our problem. So it was a big challenge to explain within the Israeli society that this is actually all of the Jewish world's problem. Because when we decide about conversion in Israel, like the law of the return, it actually impacts all Jews around the world. And we stopped it basically when we managed to create first and foremost a bloc in the Knesset that will not, more than 61 members of Knesset signed off to our demands to vote against the bill. Then he decided not to bring it up. But it was a small tip game, because the last tip was through the Prime Minister. So it was actually going through many, many directions. We asked you to send emails to the Prime Minister's office and to the embassies, so that the voice from abroad will be heard when we knew that the Prime Minister was sitting on the fence, not outing with his own views, whether he was for or against the legislation. And when new pressure came in, after we had a vast majority within the Knesset, it became clear to the Prime Minister that he would pay a heavy price if he will not say that he's against the legislation. Then he came out and said he's against the legislation. Then Rotem decided that he's not going to bring it up again. But he's waiting. He's waiting for the first opportunity to find things to have leverage on the Likud, on the Prime Minister, in order to try and pass it again. Unless we continue building our strength to show that we can stop it. One example. Short, another example. Just about, I don't know if you heard that during the past 2 months, suddenly an issue of the conversion within the army also raised. Suddenly, after many years of conversions, which were more liberal but still orthodox, within the army, were questioned by the very, very strict orthodox within the national rabbinate in Israel. And it was taken to court. And suddenly, for the first time, we heard that the representative of the state, speaking for the rabbinate, said, you know what, we have questions about the legality of these conversions. So, of course, we started to make a row about that. Just as on a personal note, beside our own 2 kids, we have one child who's actually, we call it adopted child, a bigger child who's actually made Aliyah through Nale, when Jackie sent kids from the former Soviet Union to Israel. The parents stayed in the Soviet Union. They came to Israel to study, and some of them eventually became Israeli citizens, went to the army and so on. One of these guys is adopted by our family. He went through conversion within the army during his army service, a full 3.5-year army service. And suddenly there is a question about the fact what will happen. He's about to get married. What will happen when he wants to get married? Will someone tell him, no, we actually don't accept the conversion that you passed? So that's a personal note about that. But the other day, just Sunday before I came here, I read in the newspaper that this is the bill, legislation that the government is actually promoting to make sure that these conversions will be accepted, is actually being discussed within the governmental committee of the cabinet. So I called the minister that we work with closely within these institutions, and I tell him, how come you didn't call me to tell me that this is on the agenda? He said, you're right, but I'm just driving to the meeting and I see the agenda now and it's on the agenda. What am I supposed to do? What is the position do you want me to take? So during the cabinet meeting, I was in another meeting of IRAC, by the way, some of you probably know of IRAC. We were sitting discussing IRAC policy. We were sitting and receiving text messages from him about the way that they now propose to advance. Do we agree? Do we not agree? What do we order him to vote? And by the way, one of the things that we asked him to make sure of is that yes, we are very much for the legislation, but we are not for the fact that Rotem, he was the one who also asked for this legislation, will get credit for the fact that he passed this law when he's so much connected to the law that we were so much against, because people get confused. So we said, we demand you as government to take control over the legislation and pass it as a governmental legislation so that he will not take credit for the fact that he was the one who brought this legislation, and people get confused about good Rotten bill, bad Rotten bill, and so that's one of the things that we ordered them, and that was what the government decided, that they're going to take control over the legislation, and yes, they're going to make advances on it. Sorry for taking so long, but that's it.
So I think you all probably have a great many questions, because each time we've spoken while we've been here, everyone has realized together that this really is a change on the ground. That the fact that we have these kinds of political contacts and the ability to make our views heard in the halls of government from the inside is a change. I don't want to overstate the situation. I don't want to understate it. Before I make a concluding point, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our very close ties in the WZO, the World Zionist Organization, are not only with our faction partners, Labor and Meretz, but we have very close working relationships, I would say expanding relationships with Kadima, and very practical on-the-ground relationships with the other parties as we need them for things that we are proceeding with in the WZO. And as we know, once you build ties there, those relationships expand beyond that particular arena. That's a great start for 6 months since the World Zionist Congress. But we all know that if the story were that simple, we would be having a party tonight and not making a speech. So life in Israel is multifaceted. Affiliations, coalitions, and governments come and go, and building a consensus within Israeli society around the values which we all share is a long process. What we have right now is a lever that we didn't have before, and the need to use it effectively and wisely, as I mentioned. And we also have a need to use it in a rather immediate time, because everything can change. The government of Israel can change, but so can our power within the World Zionist Organization. the work that Pro-Zion does to build up membership reflects very directly on how effective we can be in the World Zionist Organization. And the same point needs to be made in all the 14 countries around the world which have ARTSA constituent organizations and the ones where those organizations are just starting. It's a real on-the-ground job to fill the membership lists and do that work and to make that work effective and to do what we all believe in, which is creating more Zionists. We need to educate in every country. The real point is that it's not just the story it was before, it's a new and empowered story, and we all need to watch the headlines to see what happens next as we go. So maybe, if it's okay with you, we'd like to hear from everyone here about your thoughts, your concerns, the directions you think it should go in, and I'm sure everybody has questions for Yaron as the leader of our movement in Israel. So.
Yes, I was going to say, we're obviously very fortunate in having two speakers here who clearly have great influence in what's going on on the Israeli political scene and with progressive Judaism. So do we have any questions, points to make that people would like either Joan or Yaron to give answers to? Yes, Paul.
Could you say something about the position on non-Orthodox marriage within Israel? Because it seems to me one of the main stumbling blocks for progressive Jews is that Israel is a country in the world where only Orthodox marriages between Jews are acceptable. What progress is being made in sorting that out, and is it ever likely to be sorted out?
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, that's something for me to answer, and the answer is very unfortunate. Nothing is really happening there. There's a big issue, and I must tell you that's a story I think John heard for the first time yesterday or the night before. Actually, one of my biggest clients is the biggest and strongest IT company in Israel. It does hardware and software and communications and everything. And the biggest stockholder there, the main owner there, is a Haredi Jew from Bnei Brak, who've been working together for many, many years. He's from Ponivich. I don't know if you know Ponivich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, very sharp-minded people. But he's a Zionist Haredi. He did army service, by the way, which is strange for Jews, but he did. And as I was running for the position of the chair of the IMPJ, I said that instead of him reading it in the papers, he should hear it from me. And he was sat down to one of us and said, by the way, just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be the chair of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. And just so that you don't misunderstand, I mean the reform movement in Israel. So he looks at me and he says, you know, I actually admire the reforms because it's getting Jews who have no connection to Judaism to bring them to some connection of Judaism. But there is one issue that we will never agree on. Let's decide not to discuss it, and that's the issue of marriage. Because when we bring into Israel different kinds of marriages, we'll have to keep different kind of books whose child is a child that was married by whose parents were married by whose rabbi, and in what way, and therefore he cannot marry my child because we will not accept he may be a complete mamzer for their point of view, therefore he cannot marry his son or daughter. That's a big issue. And I think he's not right. I think that eventually, today, without us being told, there are keeping books, okay? They will not allow my child to marry their daughter, that's for sure, because I'm not a Jew enough for them anyway. They keep books.
Because you're reforming?
Not because I'm reformed, because they don't know where my mother came from, where my father came from, who married them. Oh, they were married by the way, my parents were married Irish during the Shoah, but they joined the British Army to fight the Nazis, and they met in service, and they got married. And my mother always said that this rabbi looked so un-Jewish. She never really understood. So I don't even know if they will be accepted as being wed by. So I don't know, but I'm telling you, they are keeping books now, and they are checking names now, and it's a myth to say that only if we have reform or non-Orthodox marriage in Israel, then we'll have to keep books. I think they're keeping books now, and I think it's time to say to the Israeli institutions, to the Israeli government, it's time that you accept the fact there are non-Orthodox Jews who wish to perform Judaism their way. As long as you decide that marriage in Israel is done under the matrimonial law and not under a civil law, which will be a good solution for them to solve it. As long as you decide that it's matrimonial law, we want our rabbis to wed our children, and you are not in a situation to decide that you're not accepting them. It's a struggle that when we are strong enough and empowered enough, we'll put on the table, because it's inevitable. So that's my answer to that.
Is the political situation in Israel with their voting system and the influence that the Orthodox parties have there, is that ever likely to happen, do you think?
It is, if we decide that we are going to play the same game, and that we are not actually immune from playing the political game. If we become the ones who makes the shot, who calls the shot, who's going to make the coalition, because we'll have reform people, if not in a reform party, which I prefer not to personally, but this is discussable, but we'll have reforms that we will empower to go into parties, and through the agreements that Joan was hinting at, that we are now working on, personally, yours truly, as we say here, under the directions of Arzenu, to try and come to terms with a very wide and strong force of liberal forces, starting at the Jewish world, meaning our faction, together with the faction that holds in Kadima, North Zionim, and conservatives. Together, we are such a strong bloc within the Jewish institutions that we can actually have a lot of influence on what goes on within the Israeli Knesset, because there's Kadima on the one hand, Meretz and Labour on the other hand. We have a very strong team of allies that if we put them, make them commit to a document, like the document we have today, by the way, with them, but it's a signed document, and like the document we have today with our partners that says we are not only about jobs within the Zionist institutions, we are about changing, and John may read to you from this.
Because it's really kind of a thrilling, it validates the point very effectively, and I haven't shared it in any other venue, and I think it's important. It's just a paragraph. This is the partnership agreement that we signed with the two political parties. The parties will work with the goal of strengthening the status of Israel amongst world Jewry, inculcating the values of pluralism in Israel and in the diaspora, and reinforcing the values of human dignity, social justice, and the rule of law in Israeli society. They will do so out of a sense of faith in the vision of creating a model society in the State of Israel as established in the Jerusalem program of the World Zionist Organization.
So we can call in, we be the Maccabees, and we call in all among saying, who accepts pluralism and human rights and social justice as a common platform, and leave aside the issue of what you agree on, you disagree about when we will eventually leave the territories and have two states. Let's leave leave it aside as a side issue, vote whatever you want to vote on these issues. But those of you who are willing to sign on to such an agenda, join us. Then we'll have a bloc that eventually will be able to make a change.
Okay, about 2 years ago, I think, Mary Gold went to courts, coming from a synagogue in Renana, to get acceptance for a reform synagogue being equal to the Orthodox synagogue, to enable the government to pay equally to Orthodox synagogues to reform synagogues on government's coffers, if you like. What is the situation today, say 2 years further down the line?
It's being stalled, well, it's in court. It's being stalled by the government. It's actually not the government, it's more complicated. It's actually the Orthodox institution of Rabbanut has to pay. We are demanding that the court imposes on the government to order that the monies that are paid for the Rav of Gezer, in this case, of that place, will be paid to Mary Gold as a non-Orthodox rabbi, and they're stalling because everybody knows that eventually, if it comes to a judgment, the court will have to rule in our favor. So they're stalling all the time for time, and
Who is they?
they are, in this case, is the government. The government, in this case, is represented by the Ministry of Justice that is answerable to the Court of Justice. It's the High Court of Justice, so that's where we go. But eventually, everybody knows that this has to be the ruling. So it's either they're trying to find ways and means to avoid the fact that they'll have a judgment in their hands.
I understand that they're actually talking about negotiated arrangements and
That's
that,
what I'm saying.
no, but I just want to
judgment.
expand, so what that means, can you explain?
Yes,
The
it
alternative
means that if they understand that they're going to have a ruling against them, they prefer not to have a ruling and to come to some kind of an agreement with terms and so on and so on. So that this will not turn to be a precedent, otherwise that would be a big problem.
I was going to answer that obviously, if it was in favour of them, that would be a precedent for
Exactly.
future
Exactly.
reform.
But sometimes, being a lawyer, sometimes when you go to court, and in the court the other side said, we offered them to come to a settlement, and they refuse to come to a settlement. Then the court looks at you and says, you refuse to come to a settlement, I want to hear what's the settlement that you refuse. Knowing that altogether that you are fighting for the precedent, and they are trying to avoid the precedent, and the court says, let's solve the issue at hand, and don't try me for precedents, okay? So we know the limits of how to press judges, and you should know that the very dedicated team of Iraq will not give up if we think we can win war at this fight. But
Can I just ask a question then? If you don't get a precedent, that will restrict more reform synagogues growing. The whole point is that if you could obtain a precedent, that gets into a situation, then IMPJ would be in a position to grow much more quickly with additional synagogues, because then if money is forthcoming, then you will get people coming to synagogue without necessarily having to pay money themselves.
exactly. But one way that we can unfortunately not receive a precedent is by the government keep on sending notices to the court that they're still evaluating the issue and they're trying to reach a settlement, and therefore they ask for a further extension. So then we have to decide eventually whether we want to come to a settlement or have an endless extension. And even here, in the kingdom of justice and everything, and law and order, if the Crown asks for further extension, the Crown will receive further extension, because that's part of it. So it's a game. But I think we know how to play best the hand that we have at the moment.
Just be patient is the answer.
It's be patient and hit when you actually think that you can get the most.
Sure. So,
I'm a little perturbed by what you've been, not you personally, but what we've all been saying to some extent. One of the great problems of Israel at the moment is the non-recognition of a Jewish status, a unified Jewish status. We are now making mistakes. Now, I myself have been guilty of calling ourselves Reformed Jews, etc. We are not Reformed Jews. We are all Jews. This is the whole very important distinction. We worship in a different way. We may believe in a different way. But I want to be recognized in Israel, in here or everywhere else, as a Jew. Hitler didn't make any difference as far as I remember. And it's very important that we don't fractionalize ourselves, which we tend to do between these fractions in this country and everywhere else, where we tend to have this movement, that movement is better than another movement. It's not a question of being better, it's something what we ourselves believe in. But I think we've got to fight for this very much. One of the big problems on this is in Israel is that we have the Supreme Court and the legal legislation all laid down very nicely. It's fairly well written down, it's quite a good constitution, there's nothing much wrong with it. But we have a rabbinate which does not obey the constitution and doesn't obey the Supreme Court. Any decision by the Supreme Court is not considered accepted by the rabbinate. And that is the main fraction in Israel, and that I think is the one we've got to fight more than anything else. The fact that we want to be Jewish, all of us Jews together, and not fractionalize ourselves and fight this idea that the rabbinate is supreme to the state.
I would comment that that was really the intention of including the words "under rule of law" in that document, because I think one of the most distressing, I'm a lawyer too, and one of the most distressing things that one sees in Israel right now is the flaunting of the law by the extreme right. I'm going to just tell a story. You all know about the Emmanuel schools issue that happened in Israel in the summertime. The court ordered the integration of the Emmanuel school, and the Emmanuel parents who flaunted that law were ordered to, were found in contempt of court, and then 100,000 Haredim demonstrated in support of the people who were ignoring the law and had been penalized for it. It's an astonishing thing to be in a situation where an order of the highest court is ignored by somebody by a group who feels that there's a higher authority. It's threatening, because if we don't have a consensus that ultimately the law must rule, well, then what do we have? And in fact, I think a study recently showed, we all know an organization, Hiddush, that did a study of most distressing issues for Israelis. The key issue that was identified in that study, the largest majority of identified issues of the extreme religious right and the rest of the country as the most gripping issue. So I couldn't agree with you more. But on the ground, what that looks like, I think this is actually what this is all about. That we need to have a situation where the law becomes, I'm going to say the outside of Israel view, and then everyone can talk about on the ground. It's just such an important point that I needed to echo it back to you. That I think it's extremely important, but the process of advancing a small L liberal view, the one that, again, I'm sure we all share, about the importance of the rule of law, respect for the individual, which is democracy, the more we can express that view and have it be echoed in the political and social milieu in Israel, the more we will enable the battle against what we see now. And that comes back again to ensuring that our representatives in Israel, the reform movement, can grow, and that on the ground here we can educate to these issues and build support for the work that's being done in Israel. It really is a power issue, and we need to increase the power of the people who share our values in order to defeat it. Okay, Yaron?
I think it's, we should be, because it's such a very delicate issue, we should be very careful with our words. First, it is very important for us to note the fact that there is a rule of law, and whatever the Supreme Court says, everybody accepts. Okay? Acts and do what the Supreme Court says. It means that the government submits itself to the judgment of the Supreme Court. Although they prefer many times not to, and although ministries who are traditionally held by very orthodox or Haredi streams. That's the Ministry of Interior, basically. But they submit themselves, and at the moment it's the rule of the Supreme Court that you as a Jew will accept it in Israel as a Jew, because you're a Jew in the congregation where you came from. The issue now becomes more, and that's another issue that we brought to court, is the issue of conversion that was done. And this issue goes back to the Ruppin conversion bill, because one of the things that Ruppin was trying to stop with his bill, very sophisticated, is avoid the ruling of the Supreme Court. So one of the agreements that we have made of a timeout, like they say in basketball, of the issue that he will not raise in the Knesset, is that we agree for a postponement in the court of the issue of the judgment regarding the conversion that was brought to the court. So that's another issue, because the government does submit itself to the Supreme Court. And the third issue, the third layer, is actually the acceptance of such a ruling by the Rabbanut, by the religious institutions. Now, that's a completely different issue, because you cannot tell someone to accept something that his belief doesn't allow him to accept. But that gives us actually the leverage to say that is exactly why we demand a separation between the state and religion. If the government, the court says that this is, if the court says that this is a just full conversion, and the government has to accept such conversion, then the institution of the government, which is a Rabbanut, cannot say, I don't submit myself to what let the court deal with legal issues and leave for me, the Rabbanut, the issues of belief and Judaism. So we tell them, if you don't want the court to interfere in issues of your Judaism and your belief, don't be a government officer. So long as you're a government officer and you're acting under legislation protection, you will have to submit yourself to the ruling of the courts. That's what's happening at the moment. The only reason the court, which does not like to be called in to interfere in such issues, has to, it's because we said, I'm sorry, this is the law. The law says that the Rabbanut has authority. You, the Supreme Court, have to supervise this authority. If they weren't protected by the law, and it's a matter of belief, we will not need to go to you. You will really not have authority, but then we will be right in saying that's a separation between state and religion.
But I think you need also to talk about, I think this is such
I think I've talked enough.
I want to have a discussion, but maybe we'll wait until tomorrow. Oh, you're going back, so we can't have it tomorrow when we're breakfast.
We won't be here.
Yeah. Well, we've begun many conversations which we need to complete next time I'm in Israel. The pressure which this situation is putting on the Supreme Court and the respect or reduction of respect in which the court is held. But perhaps we have other issues that we... Sorry, I'm just thinking, Rebecca.
The truth is that I don't think that the Supreme Court is under real threat by the Haredi. That's not true. It is very largely accepted within the legislators and within the Israeli society that the Supreme Court is respected, accepted, bowed to, and there are, that's now turning to my profession, there are issues that we didn't open yet, but we will if you like, that we as professionals sometimes also have our criticism about the fact that during the Supreme Court President Barak's era, the Supreme Court really did go into a single balance between the three forces of the three institutions of democracy is broken, it is very dangerous, because there are really questions that I allow myself to tell the Supreme Court judges that I do have issues with. I don't really think that it's an issue for the Supreme Court judges to decide exactly which and how many houses, how long and how close to the border are to be protected in what way. There are things that you have to allow the government to decide for. It's their policy, and the court does not run the policy. They were not elected by the people. That's democracy. The people who were elected by the people and that can be voted down by the people are ones who make policies. And sometimes, too often, we have the Supreme Court interfere with policies. You can give to this one, you can't give to this one, with that. These are issues that we prefer the court, just in order for the court to stay dignified and accepted so widely, not to go into. But that's a different issue.
George first, and yes, George.
Yes, you mentioned a couple of times Iraq, where Israel Religious Action Committee. Could you elaborate a bit more on the relationship between Iraq and the Israel movement of progressive Judaism?
Oh, it's our arm.
The relative.
It's very simple. Iraq is our arm. It's part of our movement, and it's our arm that works within the greater national Israeli society, legislation, what you call lobbying, press and media and stuff like that. That's our arm working within the national forces, while we have another arm acting within the congregations. So that's Iraq is part of our movement.
It is part of our.
Yes.
When they then, and let me add a more laughable note, when they were in trouble financially because they didn't get enough funding from abroad, it almost broke down the whole movement, because we are responsible for their salaries that are being paid every month to the lawyers, to Anat, and they took a large cut in their salaries in order to balance their a simple answer to that.
Hi, I have three questions actually. I'm on the council of PKY in London, Beta Israel, and I'm actually planning on making a Aliyah next summer. And I wrote a dissertation about progressive Judaism in Israel, so I have several things, but just simple. It's just actually probably really easy questions. So, we mentioned the synagogue funding. I just read that in 2008 the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Iraq versus the Office of Religious Services of the Prime Minister's Office, and ordered that at least two congregations, Yozma and Sulam Yaakov, received money, and they received money to build buildings. So, but that did not count as.
No, that's for the building.
Okay.
But that you allow me to go back to what we were talking here, because of our political ties. We have ministers that are sitting in the committees that give funding for buildings. So now we don't have to take it to the court. We have ministers from the labor sending erect buildings for us to build a new congregation.
And that is an ongoing process.
It is.
No.
Once we want it in court, that's it.
Okay.
It's made a precedent.
Then very simple. What's your relation to Hiddush? Are you working with them together? Or?
Hiddush?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Hiddush is actually, Hiddush is, you know probably of Uri Regev, who was very active within the World Union,
And previously with Ira.
And Ira.
started with Iraq, moved to the World Union, and now started his own private venture called Hiddush. And they are working similarly very much to what Iraq is doing. Of course, we are in good relations with Uri speaking. There is an issue here to be discussed.
Yes.
He said that before he started it, and I wasn't the chair then, but I made sure that that was right. It was agreed by Anat Hoffman, Iraq, and Gilad Karib what he's going to do. I don't know exactly the details, but I was telling Joan that I was sitting the other day eating my very quick falafel lunch because I didn't have time for more, and Uri steps in, and we ate falafel together. I said, Uri, we've been working for about a year. It's about time that we sit together and see exactly how we can agree on what areas of action you're doing, so that we don't waste funds that are within the reform world, because he's actually getting funds from reform people in the reform world. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to sit together and see how we can work side by side, and at least us as a movement, not assist him, but be assisted by him.
And it's worth noting, he's made a point of defining his concern narrowly as, well, it's not a narrow issue, but as religious pluralism. And Iraq and the IMPJ are understanding the responsibilities of pluralism in a more general way. So he's taken a laser focus, but on only a portion of the work that is taken on.
Yeah, okay. The last thing, the role and the involvement of Olim Hadashim in the communities in Israel and in the administration as well, like of IMPG and other movements, Iraq, involvement. Are there lots of members?
That's an issue. We have a few congregations, one that we just joined us in Haifa, another congregation in Haifa that's all of former Soviet Union Olim. So there are one congregation with all of them. There are Olim that assimilate, join the regular congregations, which for my personal belief is even better than congregations that are different. And actually one of the issues that I decided that I'll bring up on the agenda for the executive of the IMPJ that will be meeting in March for a 2-day seminar is the question of former Soviet Union Olim, and are we losing an opportunity here or just wasting money in something that anyway won't pick up, because there are different opinions here. I think it's time to have a wider discussion about that, and then to agree on a more decisive plan, instead of just saying, okay, we'll give another half of a salary to someone who will deal with Olim, not knowing if it's a waste of a half of a salary or that you're losing the opportunity because you didn't give a salary and a half, for instance. So that's an issue on the table. So I guess you get a 90 on it.
Okay, hopefully that answers your points. Any other comments or questions? Rosemary first, and then Charlie.
I don't know how much this is of your concern, but say students who are studying vocational courses at university, do they get the same grant as, say, yeshiva students?
It depends who you ask. If you ask the Haredi people, and I even remember Peres as Prime Minister saying that they're actually, the Haredi students, not students, the yeshiva workers, are actually discriminated. Because, these are numbers that you can measure this way, and this way, whatever. We just joined as a movement just to say that we're not only about religious issues in Israel. We just joined and moved and took part in a very large session of demonstrations of students that took place just last month because they were going to be demanded their tuition, very much like here, will have to rise. And at the same hand, someone signed off that yeshiva guys will be getting some help, assistance, and blah, blah, blah. And once the demonstrations were over, we understood that the monies to the yeshiva buchers were written under such criteria that anyway only yeshiva buchers can enjoy them. For instance, every student can enjoy this payment if he has at least 3 kids and up, and more than that, and if he doesn't make a salary, and if he doesn't have an income, and if he doesn't have so it means that we take responsibility, first of all, not to have children if we can't support them, and secondly, to work for our living, so we have a salary, so we can't enjoy. So you understand that this is a trick. I guess it will find itself eventually to the court.
Charlie.
My question comes in two parts. The first is about the faction that we have with the WZO and the political parties. What are the other members of the faction? What do they want out of coming into the faction with the international reform movement? And this sort of leads on to the next point, which is a sort of burning question I've wanted to ask over the last few days, really, which Yaron alluded to, in fact, which is what happens when they get what they want? Can they just break it and that's it? And isn't it just maybe cleaner and easier to set up a reform Zionist political party in Israel? And if the majority of Israelis think that they're reform Jews, but they are reform Jews, but they don't know it, wouldn't it be easier just to get them that vote, potentially? And you could be Prime Minister, and everything's cleaner and easier.
Do you want me to?
Yes, I'll just talk about the first part, because there's of course a history of broken faction agreements, and it would be naive not to acknowledge that. So they signed it because it gave them, in the very short term, positions and influence that they wanted within the World Zionist Organization. But we learned in the lead up to this World Zionist Congress, we actually learned in the last fall that Labour viewed the reform world, that is small L liberal, educated, thoughtful people like us, that we represent a possibility of important relationships beyond the World Zionist Congress, because we were asked to come up with names of people who might be prepared to join the Labour list. We couldn't do it in an organized way because Yaron will discuss the legal limitations under which the reform movement in Israel operates. But we took them up on it. We as a group sat down and had lengthy discussions about what should be our engagement with the political world. We decided that we were happy to have somebody take a position on the list. We weren't so happy with where they ended up on the list, but we were very happy that we were slowly making our way to being perceived as a useful voting bloc, and that our issues were viewed as so mainstream that not only our formal faction partners, but others would say that they were pluralists. I'm going to take one second time out. I think nobody here was at the President's Conference. Every 2 years, President Perez organizes a conference, a wonderful conference that's coming this June. There are various various tickets available. Anyway, at the end there was a debate amongst 3 political leaders. A representative of Tzipi Livni was on the stage, a Shas person was on the stage, and who was the third year one, do you remember?
The what?
The third person on the stage in that conversation was, I think, a Labour person. I don't remember. It didn't actually matter. The two non-Shas people couldn't say loudly enough that they were pluralistic and they value reform, and it was absolutely without question. So it is an important alliance beyond the boundaries of the WZO, and I wanted to make that point. Now, in terms of realpolitik and how we gain more political power in Israel, Yaron? It's a good partnership.
First of all, the other parties receive our support in getting nominations. For instance, Meretz people were supposed to stay without any position. It's because our strength and our faction, we actually got into a situation where they now have more positions than they bid for, because we actually agreed that we are going to fight to impose on Natan Sharansky to have a number 2 position, which he didn't want, and we actually did second in line, because we forced them to do so, because we said we will not vote for their nominee when they bring a nominee and their chair is changed within Jaffe, and they want us to vote for their nominee.
And we view that as a real win for us, that merits person will reflect our
Of
concerns
course,
there.
he sits in our we sit all together in monthly faction meetings that Ursula is chairing because we are the strongest part of the faction, and it is under the agreement that we chair the faction. And we send our people, we remind them that, including the minister, that wants so much to become our representative at the chair of Qatar, that they are working under the instructions that we as a faction give them. And our part of the faction receives its instructions from the reforms abroad. That's the way it works. They understand it, they accept it, and you know what, they even love it. And they attend discussions that we're having with them on strategic issues about how to get more and more Israelis involved and committed to our joint agenda, because they have the same problems. And part of what they're getting, and this actually basic thing, the basic motivation for Ehud Barak chairing the Labour Party to say 6 months before the Congress, when he called us for a meeting, he understood that Labour Party within the Israeli society is losing its audience. And he said, wow, that's a great audience, the reform movement. There are some great people there with values who are idealistic, and I want them. I want to be connected to them as a strategic alliance, not as a political alliance. So they're actually looking for the people also, for the audience of supporters. So that's about what they are in to gain in such an agreement. Other issue that you posed is why not in a party. First of all, the IMPJ as an NGO has bylaws that make it very clear that we have nothing to do with any political parties and political gain. We are bound from it, otherwise we cannot receive payments from different things, because parties are one game NGOs that are trying to work within the society and make a change within the society, receive grants and stuff like that, cannot be involved with politics, which is very important for us as law-abiding people strengthen and to stand behind. So when we made the agreement with the different political parties, the faction agreement, the IMPJ as a movement did not make that agreement. I actually received the power of attorney in a letter from Joan allowing me to sign the agreement on behalf of Arzenu, because I'm on the ground and I'm acting like a lawyer, an agent of Arzenu, because it was very important to make a point that the IMPJ is not involved in that as a movement. So that's practically why we can't do it, but I don't think it's even wise, and there is an issue here that I know that I don't share the same vision and the same answer as some of my colleagues, some of the other leaders in the reform world. It is my understanding as the chair of the IMPJ that within my movement there are people that differ on different issues which are very strong in the Israeli politics. For instance, the issue of settlers is a very big issue within the Israeli politics and within world Jewry supporting Israel as well. Nevertheless, they are committed reform Israelis. And there's no reason for me to split my movement for issues that actually prevent us from working together for all the things that we want to work together for. So I do not want to appear to congregants within my movement as actually acting in the Knesset for things that they cannot agree on. There are so many important things that we agree on and we want to work for, let's do it instead of again splitting ourselves and playing into the hands of the Orthodox by splitting our votes, because we're split on issues that are, with all due respect, issues that we all have very strong opinions about, but really our strong opinions make very little difference on the ground and onto the final outcome. So far, okay, because we can't have strong issues about settlers, but at the moment, really, it's not a relevant issue because it's not on the table. And when it was on the table, it was quite clear that there is a vast majority within Israeli society, as there is a vast majority between Jewry around the world. What could and should be done? There are people who don't agree, but the vast majority says and will say its word about these issues. And when you're a political party, you have to have an agenda on all those issues. So that, I think, will be a big mistake. But then it's arguable, I'm ready to debate it. Joe, arrange another seminar.
Yeah.
Any further comment from you, Jen?
No,
No, okay.
this issue reflects itself outside of Israel too. At the Congress, it was clear that there are people in Arzenu from a range of political perspectives on certain issues, and it's something we need to talk about. How big must our tent be, and when does it get too big? And what are our core issues, and what are we compelled to address? And I do hope you'll be in Israel in June to discuss that with us.
Any other questions or comments from anybody?
Well, the only thing we haven't embraced so many things, and they'll come back to me. We haven't discussed anything about the Arab communities and the relationships in Israel. Now, I know that because I'm involved also on the Abraham Fund over here, and they obviously have their own agenda and situation, which is specifically for Arab rights in Israel. They have the same sort of problems that you were identifying beforehand. They go to the courts agree in their favour, and then nothing actually occurs, as far as they're concerned, when they agree certain rights groups in certain areas of the country. Where does the IMPJ stand on this situation?
I think we are very much supportive, and I think it's an thank you ask these friends that Iraq is one of the supporting groups and helping. But we cannot turn these Arab congregations into joint IMPJ. Unless they go under reform conversion, which I'm willing to consider.
Unless we introduce Sharia law.
It's worth mentioning that Anat, who is a grantee of the Israel Fund, is very active. There's lots of conversations that happen amongst NGOs to empower other NGOs that strategize as NGOs together. And she's well known, as is Gilad Karib, I'm getting tired, in all of these venues as a strategist and as a thoughtful person. As you know, the NGO community in Israel is small but intense, and members of the Palestinian community are part of that NGO community and know our people, and it's a really interesting piece of life there that we don't see a lot, just how closely the progressive community of all ethnicities work together there. We would be quite proud, I think, if we knew more.
And we are there because of our reform values of Ahavat Hagir and the minorities and strengthen the ones who are in need, and that's why we're there.
Well, I'm hearing a factual matter. Reform are the liberal synagogues in Israel, not that I know, but Reform is Beit Daniel in Tel Aviv, which I think is the only one.
I'll tell you the truth, I don't know, I'll tell you why, because within the Reform movement, if you would compare them to synagogues here, you would say that some of them look more like liberals, others look like it depends about the congregation, mainly about the rabbi.
Yes.
So some of them you would say that they look liberal, but probably
Okay, let's use the umbrella of progressive. We have Beit Daniel in Tel Aviv, which I've been to actually on Yom Kippur when we were there, and in Jerusalem there's the synagogue attached to Hebrew Union College, isn't there?
that's an even smaller one, and there are many. There are Golan Shama, and
Unless it's
There are
33
communities.
That's what I'm asking. How many are there? 33 in the whole of Israel. Yes.
And there's an active plug. There's an active nursery school. One of the ways in which the communities grow is by creating nursery schools. There's an exciting move to creating further nursery schools, including in Jerusalem. I'm so proud because Canada is a supporter of the nursery school building project. So it's a very dynamic growth moment happening right now, Yaron.
Yes, we are actually working on the 2011 plans and budget, and there is actually a disagreement between Gilad and myself, Gilad being my chief executive officer, you call it, or whatever,
Yeah.
and me being the chairperson. I say that we have to commit ourselves to at least 5 new congregations in the next year. He says that's way too much, he doesn't want to commit to more than 2. I said, I think that we'll try and see, but we must commit ourselves to having more and more and more new congregations. It's so important. But of course, we have to also find the right ways to strengthen our existing congregations, not to have, because we put all our efforts in new congregations, other congregations actually collapse, which we don't want to have. That a collapsing congregation is by far takes more energy than brings in a new congregation that's growing. We know that from ourselves. So we will have to come to terms, but it's very important for us to have more and more congregations.
George?
Yeah, at one point, you mentioned the conservative congregations being in a way a rival, but surely in many
Not
ways...
rivals, but we're actually comrades, colleagues.
Yeah,
But on the Israeli soul, they are competitors, you could call it.
because obviously the conservatives have very similar aims to reduce the overall power of the Haredi and the ultra-Orthodox.
They are our partners in Iraq, you should know that. They
Yes.
don't have their own Iraq, they are our partners there, we invite them very much.
Yes.
And they are our partners, as I mentioned, more wider understanding between the 2 big factions of the WZO. So they're part of the Kadima faction and we work very closely together, and it actually is to be said that without our support and personally be acting under this support, they would not have received any position in the WZO, and we forced the new chair of the WZO to accept a vice chair responsible of financing within brackets to make sure that reforms and conservatives receive the same funding as Orthodox. We imposed on him a number 2 position from the conservatives. The vice chair of the WZO is a conservative because we demanded it.
Well, the news agency at time, when they got on the chairmanship, was very much with pressure from Dick and his various cohorts to make sure that they got one of the positions so they respect some sort of respectability within Israel.
So I think now it's more than some sort of respectability. It's a bit more than that.
Yeah, I know.
And that's good. It's something that you should be proud of, that that's happening on the ground.
Yes, excellent.
Can I ask a very simple question?
Yes.
Do you have any relationships with any communities within Europe outside the UK?
Of course.
Oh, yes. There are a number of well, of course, we are all Reform communities in Europe fall within the World Union umbrella, but there are Arzenu organizations in many European countries and some being founded. Holland, Czech Republic, Switzerland. There's one working in Spain. We're
And
working
now
on in
Iraq,
Spain.
former Soviet Union.
And Poland, like very much so. But in terms of the strength of Germany,
France, of course.
so many. Obviously the UK community is the biggest.
Do you have a list of these? Is it possible to obtain some details?
It's very easy to go to the web for the World Union of Progressive Judaism. They have a European desk under I'm sure there are, but I don't know all of them.
That's
I can
what
tell.
I'm talking
I
about.
hardly know of the relations my Rabbi Maya Leibovitz has with different congregations around the world. Surely in the UK, in the... I have no follow-up.
Maybe that Paul has
Oh,
something.
No,
No.
not specific congregations. No.
Okay.
Well, we noticed at the meeting of the World Union how lax the contact was between, on the question of the Zionist movement, between the congregation and Paris last week. And I spoke to quite a few of them, and I find I was surprised how few knew about each other. It's that activity is concerned, not the rest. They're fine within the World Union, but there's some work to be done there.
Tell me about that.
Not our responsibility, so I hope you'll go into the meeting in San Francisco and express your issues, because many of us will actually
Not our
do it.
I know it's not just what I realize that.
But part of our problems that we have to deal with.
It's an in-house problem.
Okay. A question or just thinking that we want to wrap this up? Yes. There is this leaflet, or a little pamphlet, which is on the table here, by the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, which gives a lot of information about the movement and what's happening.
Also showing the different congregations on the map.
Oh, right, yes. Yes, back on the back showing them. So please pick up one of these before you go if you'd like to. I'm going to ask George if he would... sorry, Daniel's doing it, is he right? Daniel, yes, for voting thanks to our speakers, who I should add, by the way, this is their, as I understand, their third evening on the trot doing this little presentation. They were at the Liberal Jewish Synagogue on Tuesday and at Mill Hill last night, so they've been working hard, I think.
Can I say something before they...
Yeah, please. Go on.
I wanted just to say this. It is to be noted that I, as the new chair of the IMPJ, 6 months in office, and Joan as a more longer chair of ARSA. It's the first time that we actually went together on a speaking tour like this. And it's only due to the very strong dedication of these two young kids that they made us come here for the first time. I don't want to tell you what will happen when the American movement will hear that the first time we went abroad together was to the UK and not to anyone else. So that being said, it's all because of these two.
We really appreciate it. We think you guys are great, and we really want to say it publicly. So, Fuller has one.
There we go. I think Daniel's going to tell us something about those movement.
Thank you. I'll say a few thank yous first. I'll introduce myself. I'm Daniel Needlestone. I'm here with two hats on. One of them, which I haven't mentioned, I'm the Israel officer on the board of Liberal Judaism, and just to emphasise, so I don't get into trouble, but whenever we say reform tonight, we mean liberal as well. And we have our unique situation in this country. We have two movements. And one thing Pro-Zion does, which is my other hat, I'm co-chair of Pro-Zion, is we work with both the movements and the Arzenu and the IMPJ and all the groups around the world to promote Israel and to support the movements in Israel politically. My co-chair, Charlie Gluckman, over here, I have to thank, because he did a lot of the work with the idea of bringing Joan and Yaron over, and I should thank Joan and Yaron for entertaining me tonight, last night, lunches, dinners. I feel, and I'm sure you feel as well, we could go on for hours more, and there's so much more that we haven't said. I'd like to thank Alan for chairing the meeting today, and I'd really like to thank George for helping organise tonight. He's done so much work, so much publicity, and we can tell that because despite the snow, we've got all of you here, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'll tell you a little bit more about Pro-Zion. You've hopefully all got leaflets on your chairs, but Pro-Zion, we call ourselves the Zionist Movement for Progressive Judaism. We're active in a lot of different organisations, and we work with a lot of different organisations, and we aim to try and bring a bit of Israel to progressive communities in the UK, and we aim to support progressive Judaism in Israel through the political machines that you just heard of. It's really difficult, as you can hear, to explain how we actually affect change in Israel, and I think Joan and Yaron have explained it beautifully, much better than I could have done. And we ask a few things from you guys, which we'd love to get your help and participation in Pro-Zion. The first thing you can do is we'd love to get your email addresses. We have a sign-up sheet over there, and we'll pass it around in a second. And we send out a weekly email bulletin with news stories from the movement, from Iraq,
emails telling them in short about the things happening in Israel once a week.
So, but that's the easiest thing you can do. The next thing, it's a little bit more expensive, but still not very much. And in this form here, in this leaflet here, we've got a little form you can sign up to join ProZine. It only costs you £8 to join. It's a token amount. And what's more important really than the money which you pay is getting your name on a piece of paper, because the more signatories we have, the more members we have, the more power we have in these institutions. It does really make a difference. I can tell you, because I sat in 3 months of very painful meetings at the beginning of this year getting our seats for the World Zionist Congress, and it makes a difference when we can say we have 2,000 members, which is round about what we have at the moment. And the third and fourth thing you can do is you're welcome to make a larger donation if you want to, but what we'd like even more than that is if anyone wants to get further involved and volunteer any time or be more involved in any way, please come and speak to me in Charlie. We have cards over there, and we'd like to hear what we'd like to do. We will be arranging more events next year, and hopefully we can see some of you at those as well. So thank you very much for having us. And we've got a few more biscuits over there, and we'll have a little bit of time if you want to come and chat with Joan and Yaron before we disappear out into the colours.